Okay, so we start our session, our afternoon session A1 on being more than human. Well, if you think about that, being more than human, that's rather provocative and challenging, right? Because no matter how hard we try, somehow we seem to be always stuck to the human perspective. We can be inventive with many technologies and so on. We can come up with new knowledges and methodologies. However, it's always a human perspective, I'd say. But then this panel is a real breakout session. It's just not a Zoom breakout session. We break out into art, and we have 4 exciting projects that will be introduced. And these projects, they will take us on wild hypothetical thinking, wild thinking, an exercise in art and imagination, in becoming knowledgeable by trying to leave the human perspective, by toying around, playing around in a very serious and intense manner. So this panel will be about languages, about new graphic systems, about indigenous languages, about interspecies communication and non-human code. So we were talking about languages this morning and communication, how important it is to even reconnect to the world, to order the world. Now we try to get into the arts who will teach us new ways of languages, a new set of vocabulary, and we will see is there more than a human view. So let's get to the first contribution. I can already see Beatrice Seitenberg. Hello, Bea. It's wonderful to have you with us from Karlsruhe. You are here representing a young 4-headed collective of artists, writers, researchers, and curators called LIMP. And the LIMP collective is based between the UK, France, and Germany. And what they aim in this collective is to continually engage in direct and indirect co-creations with webs of non-human interdependence. Beatrice, the mic is yours. Your project you will be talking about is called Hydrographism, Hydroecology as Speculative Writing.
Yes, exactly. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this warm welcome, Annette. And thank you, RIXC Gallery and Rasa especially for this invitation. I will start to share my screen. You see everything?
Yes, it's the presentation mode. It's all fine.
Yes. Cool. So I will speak today on the behalf of the artist and research collective LIMP, which was founded 2 years ago. And I will start with the core ideas, values, and practices on which the collective was formed. During the epochs of video conferences and online collaborative whiteboards, we, Sam Kaufmann, Margaret Minot-Thomas, Juliette Pépin, and myself, became eager to replenish our minds with challenging perspective outside our comfort zone and at the same time distance ourselves from anxiety-driven uncertainties propelled by the pandemic. At that point, we were scattered in 4 different celestial directions, and all 4 of us haven't met outside the virtual realm till then. So tools like Miro that you might be familiar with helped us to navigate through our interests and keep our minds connected. And I will share with you the link to this Miro board in the chat. So you can have a look yourself while I will navigate through this. Should be in the, I'll listen to Ellie. Here you go. Yes, so this was our network that we dived in and started to share our interests and experiences and in which directions we want to continue to work. So as you see, each of us has started to build an island made of visual and linguistic points of departure, which slowly grew into a map of visualizing our common interest. Namely, each member's ongoing endeavor to counteract Western, Western obsessions in fixing non-human bodies. Fixations can consist of sealing non-humans in aseptic vitrines for indefinite time, or through enclosing taxonomic classification, which speaks the language of abjection. I'm thinking here, for example, of the display of non-human beings in natural history museums. And once the sanitary situation allowed it, we decided to take those entangled syllables and collages into a physical exhibition titled Hydrographism. That took place at the CCA Brighton Dorset Place Gallery last year. And this was also the first time where we saw each other in a physical space, actually. The exhibition attempts to appropriate the cartographic and economic practice of hydrography into hydrographism by using mixed media such as AI-generated images, textile, photography, and living matter. So why hydrography describes the physical features of water primarily for navigation, safety, and economic development, hydrographism imagines ways of sensing, narrating, and understanding aquatic environments. The exhibition facilitates LIM's collective critique of aquatic taxonomy while displaying experiments with more than human forms of writing and thinking through water. I will continue now by introducing each individual artistic work. And it's important to stress, however, that none of us four has a specific task. Rather, we all wear many hats while creating this exhibition. So we were all technicians, we were all researchers, artists, friends, curators, and administrators. And I will start with the piece by Sam Kaufman. Sam Kaufman's multimedia installation Metabolism 3, Ghosts, explores taxonomic impulses through machine learning and local seaweed species. AI neural networks trained on 19th century collections of seaweed herbaria by Anna Atkins rewire biological categorization into images beyond identification. So as you see here quite nicely, the inscription and the taxonomic classification that you see in the bottom becomes unreadable, and it merges through the different images and it's overlapping. So it's being kind of a completely new species that it's being born. Meanwhile, at the same time, dried algae reawakened in a seawater lived and breathed in the gallery throughout the exhibition. While the artist sets the frame, both pieces develop vitality and temporality indifferent to the human gaze. Then Juliette Pépin's work, Dyer. It is an interpretation of pond skaters, taxonomy and their habitat, namely the pond. Her piece could be seen as a forensic scene exploring the different conditions enabling or disabling pond skaters to evolve in the ecosystem. Dyer #1 that you see on the left side is a reconstruction of a pond built from 150 AI-generated images of clean and polluted ponds printed on a textile. Dyer 2 that you see on the right-hand side stages key elements of the locomotion of pond skaters, walks, hairs, and torsion. So we nailed them to the wall and it looks like these legs are piercing through the wall. So from ponds to the coastline towards wetlands, how to embody the choreographies of temporality. And for Margaret Minot-Thomas, rituals are inscriptions of long sense of temporality. In her image series Wayfinding, she retraces and reinscribes together with her family wetlands features. Rubbings of a circular stone that you see on the left-hand side, carved over 5,000 years ago, begin to question the temporality of human traces on natural surfaces. Informed by these ancient traces, a series of videos document our compulsion to mark our presence into the landscape. As such, wetlands ultimately become part of intergenerational narratives. And in the exhibition, each of us contributed, each of these contributions that you just saw was accompanied by a physical vitrine that was in the center of the exhibition, which mirrors our initial tool or technique to change perspective and our collective approach to more than human world making. So visitors were invited to leave and bring and take objects that responded to the exhibition's themes and public program. In this way, anyone can contribute to a living archive, feeding into new ecopoetic methods of more than human kinship. So different than a vitrine in a other museum context. It wasn't sealed, and the pieces were changed constantly. Sometimes they were taken out, sometimes new were placed inside. It was completely rearranged, and through this thread, everyone can make new connections inside the vitrine. And there were also no labels or whatsoever. And this archive is still growing on an endless digital canvas. And I would like to share with you this website that we are working on. I can also share the link with you later on. So this is the website that we created. It's on Research Catalog. And here you also have different links and more information about the exhibition and about us. You see here some interviews. You see also the public program and the material that we used, a short description. And also what we included here is a manual for becoming hydrophilic. So this invites everyone to explore local wet ecologies through exercises or cooking recipes and reading material. So example here, you will land to a page where you have some reading material as a PDF file. Here you have an exercise, and for accessibility, we also reading this here. And here you have a cooking recipe with sea lettuce that you can do at home, and so on and so on. And you're leading then through the whole network. And up here you can see the navigation. So this is the whole website basically that we are constantly feeding with new information. So to sum up, on the one hand, hydrographism allowed us to investigate how to include and display non-human perspectives in the art, and thereby challenging Western classification systems. On the other hand, we questioned our artistic translation and interpretation of non-human sense and world making into digital media before and throughout the preparation of the exhibition. So we are convinced that collective practice and research allow a more critical approach to those concerned. However, as you also might be challenged with or come across with, it is very difficult to find a space and a funding for collective art and research practice. It's much more targeted for individual artists. So to end, maybe I would like to share some questions with you that accompany our research. And it's still like, of course, ongoing, our work. And we are very interested throughout to ask these following questions to ourselves, to the audience, and in our practice. So for example, how can more than human practices of art making can challenge or change the way humans and non-humans coexist in times of ecological catastrophes? Is this a sustainable approach to representing non-humans through digital matter? It's also something that we discussed at the beginning of today's session. And how does the very matter used in visual production relate to non-humans' ecology and state of being? Yeah, so I will just leave this questions here, and maybe throughout the whole conference we will find some answers or ideas to them. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. Our time slot is already up for this presentation, but maybe can you give us a brief outlook where your hydrography or hydrographism will take you as a next step? Also maybe link back to Karlsruhe, that you bring your limbs back to Karlsruhe.
Yes, that would be wonderful. We are now like again scattered also outside of Europe, so it would be great to maybe find also a place again to find this kind of narratives that we built on. And also I think the public program that we arranged and also this website that I just shared, we can do this everywhere. It's not bound to any place, because ecological questions that we had about water, especially in Brighton, we can also focus this in the Rhine River, for example. So it's very like extendable and adaptable to each place.
Last question, will the water spiders also be playing a role in your next?
This is a good question leading to Ellie's talk. And I think she will answer this as well, how maybe water spiders are also inhabiting different kind of ponds and wetlands in Germany, especially.
So stay tuned, Bea. Thank you. And give a hand already to Ellie. Ellie is joining us from Australia, from Brisbane, I believe, right? Can you hear us, Ellie?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We hear you as well. Wonderful.
Ooh, good.
Welcome.
That is wonderful. Thank you.
You are leading us into mythopoesis. And
I am.
Yes, and just
I'm leading us on an
introduction who you are to the audience. Ellie is an artistic researcher who critically and creatively explores the many thresholds between the human and the non-human. And today she will be telling us from her active work as being a member of Thomas Saraceno's transdisciplinary Archaeophilia research project, which uses to figure out the web building of spiders to explore ecological possibilities for interspecies relation. So it's a huge topic, and all by itself, your title of your lecture.
It's too much. I've realized.
So take us in there.
Okay, I'm a bit of a Luddite with sharing, so let me give it a go. I have to present this, don't I? Hang on, tools. But just as I'm trying to work this out, as you suggested, is that working?
We don't see you
at all.
Not yet.
No. What about now? Okay.
See it fine now.
Yes. So the title is a bit bold, and as I came to sort of pull apart the elements of this talk, I've had to sort of bring my ambitions back a little bit. But I'll just start and let it tell a story. So this paper is going to explore some speculative possibilities for interspecies communication in art practices that engage in a fictioning or mythopoesis of the animal encounter. So these are practices that draw from the emergent potentials that are already there in an encounter with animal otherness, in order to weave new worlds and propositions for more than human relation. And specifically, I'm going to be examining some of these speculative forays into human-spider communication, extending from Tomas Saraceno's interdisciplinary arachnophilia research program, with which I'm affiliated, and also with which Dyer is very, very familiar. So time constraints mean that I'm going to focus on the human-spider concerts in which a human musician or performer engages in a mediated sonic encounter with one or more spiderly co-creators. So Saraceno calls these spider jam sessions, already framing the creativity within these encounters as emergent, responsive, but also distributed across the different bodies, human and non-human, that take part in the jam. So these jams enact a creative riffing as a cross-body attunement. So a transformation of sensing bodies and the shape of the interspecies encounter through an alertness to the emergent possibilities and the transversal sensory affectations that this encounter fields. And as we'll explore, spider jam sessions are grounded in the effective possibilities for extralingual communication that arise in and through the passage of vibration. So a vibration being the primary mode by which spiders grasp and make sense of the world, and also affective intercessors. Vibrations have a capacity to traverse species and sensory thresholds, so linking and collecting divergent bodies. Perhaps I'm going a bit too fast. I might slow it down. So, as I was alluding to, I had hoped to discuss the spider jams in relation to Saraceno's arachnomancy or spider divination project, but there isn't space to respectfully unpack this project while attending to its underpinnings in the divination practices of Cameroon's Mambilla people. But I do want to point to how these two forms of human spider mediation, so the vibrational jams and divination, how they are linked. And linked not only because they both appear in Saraceno's practice, but linked in terms of the concepts that they offer for reimagining interspecies communication, concepts that only became clear to me through an attempt to think these practices in tandem. So both the spider jam and divination practices begin by treating the otherness of the spider as a lure for making relations across thresholds of difference, or rather for making relations differently. Both propose embodied and effective modes of communication beyond language, beyond intellection, beyond the need for knowing as such, via a sensing of qualitative differences that elide representation or comprehension. I should say human comprehension. Both express possibilities for interspecies attunement through the elicitation of sympathetic resonance between bodies, so a passaging of intensity, a harmonic pulsing that links and thrums across lines of difference, holding difference together. Both practices demand, both divination and spider jam practices demand that you prepare for the encounter, that you ready yourself to go visiting, as Vinciane Desprez would put it, where loosening the hold of logic and reason, this kind of preparatory act, frees you to become curious about, become sensitive to the agencies, signs, and affects that animate an encounter with spiderly worlds. And both can be read as world-building fictions that draw from and disrupt a given reality in order to summon and invent with a collective tendency for becoming other that already exists as emergent potential. So to think with sense with spiders is a necessarily speculative endeavor. It demands, therefore, speculative techniques and modes of thinking that break with the perceived limits and hierarchies of life and relation, the habitual ordering of life and agency that tells us that something as bold as human-spider communication is just not possible. This task is also speculative in the sense of being uncertain, precisely because of the gap, this sizable threshold of difference between spider and human. As Rosie Braidotti and others have argued, spiders are abject figures of non-human otherness that seemingly index a relation to non-human alterity. Their queer carnality, their bloodlust, segmented and hairy bodies, all underscore a seemingly impassable threshold between human and spider, a categorical divide written along speciated, sensory, and ontological lines. And this difference seemingly challenges the very possibility, even perhaps the desire, for human-spider relations. In Saraceno's praxis, and likely most attempts at interspecies communication, this threshold of difference between spider and human is not an exclusionary edge, but a lure for creative invention, for imagining how we might make relations make sense otherwise. This is to understand otherness as a lure in the sense of a neo-Spinozist biophilosophy, where difference is the very engine of relationality, but also in a Whiteheadian sense as an opening onto the lure of the possible, a lure to which artistic praxis like Saraceno's respond. To respond to the lure of otherness is to engage imaginatively with the possibilities of how this world might be rendered otherwise. That is, to engage with the practice of fictioning. The idea of interspecies communication as fictioning or mythopoesis draws from provocations that exist, for instance, in Donna Haraway's writing about the work of speculative fiction, in writing new possibilities for multi-species relation, in Vincent Desprez's work that takes seriously the proposition of curiosity and imagination in approaching interspecies communication, and in Simon O'Sullivan's exploration of artistic fictioning, including his subcategories of myth science, mythopoesis, and mythotechnesis, as world-building gestures that draw from the real in order to imagine new models and perspectives of thought and relation. And importantly, such fictions are rarely neutral. They work to actively disrupt the hegemonic, romantic, and hierarchical narratives in which human and animal bodies have historically been caught. Narratives that cleave natures and cultures, narratives in which an affectivity or intimacy of human-spider relation is unthinkable. So framing these kind of interspecies mediations as fictions is not about marking them as unscientific or as not real. Rather, it's to understand how alternate fictions or worlds of possibility erupt from, and indeed are already contained within, the hegemonic narrative structuring any given reality, including that fiction that we call science. So Saraceno's mythopoetic spider experiments have their anchors in collaborations with scientific researchers, whose data and tools become invitations for invention, for telling a different story about the world and the possibilities of relation it embeds. The fiction of vibrational human-spider communication does not run counter to a scientifically codified reality. Rather, it runs interference, probing science as boundary objects in order to ask, what if things could be otherwise? So the starting lure for these spider jams was in his conversations with biotremologists. So these are scientists studying animal vibrational communication, which then opened up a creative window onto the spider's peculiar vibratory sensory world. Web-building spiders, with whom Saraceno's work is preoccupied, are essentially blind, building an image of the world and its movements through the vibrations, airborne and substrate-borne, to which they are acutely attuned via specialized vibrational sensory organs, of which we humans possess no sensory cognates. The vibrations the spider sends and receives travel like shivers along the threads of the immense silken body of her web, her limbs poised on these self-same silken threads, anticipating, producing, and responding to tremor. Inaudible to an unaided human ear, these vibrational signals can be interspecific or intraspecific. They can convey information about atmospheric shifts, about the integrity of the web itself. For the spider, the web is an instrument and organ of immediation and sense that she continually adjusts in order to tune its capacity to capture vibrations, to relay vibrations back and forth. The web thus becomes a material extension of her vibrational sense. Spider and web intimately interwoven in a sensory material passing of tremor. So we humans don't possess a spiderly sensitivity to vibration, but we are nonetheless sensitive to it. We feel vibration, the hairs of our skin standing on end at a club when the sub-bass snarl of a giant speaker erupts on the surface of our skin, resonates our organs. Can you feel it? You might shout to a friend over the vibrant hum as this sense arrests your bodies now affectively coinciding in a realm of collective and intensive tremor. As scholars in sound studies and more than human anthropology remind us, vibration is transgressive, traversing and confusing bodily and species thresholds. Stefan Helmreich and Michelle Friedner argue that vibrations enact a sensory smudging between hearing and tactility, offering propositions for undoing our habits of sense and relation, displacing the hegemony of the eye, our ocular centrism, but also the eye, the way we think of ourselves as sensing subjects. It asks what new sensorial subjectivities might arise from opening ourselves up to vibration, to a vibrational ontology that Steve Goodman describes as not invested in a physics or philosophy of acoustics, but, and I quote, in the basic processes of entities affecting other entities. In its disruptions and transgressions, vibration is an alluring proposition for thinking about post-anthropocentric modes of sense, and therefore speculative modes of attunement with non-human others, like the spiders who express the human other's limit point. So lured by the possibilities of opening onto this vibratory realm, Saraceno worked with a team of scientists and technicians to invent devices, these are modified piezo elements, for listening to and rendering audible the spider's web-based vibrations, and for transducing vocal or musical acoustic signals into vibratory tremors that can then travel through the sensory material body of the spider web. So these devices opened up different possibilities for encountering spiders, for effectively coinciding in a vibratory realm. Saraceno began to invite musicians and performers into his studio so that they might encounter the spiders in what he called sonified webs. These are webs that, while already instruments of vibration for the spider, could now pass human acoustic sounds into web-based signals and render audible the vibrations that already tremble the web, opening up a vibrational channel of interspecies dialogue, the spider jam. So the spider's signals, now rendered audible, affect the human musician's choices in the unfolding of the jam. In this pictured encounter, Evan Zipperin relayed how jamming worked better when he placed the bowl of his saxophone on the table on which the web rested, amplifying the possibility for substrate-borne vibrations to relay between human, saxophone, table, web, and spider, allowing Zipperin also to feel into the recursive haptics of the sounds he produced. In experimenting with gestures as if he were a vibrationally sensitive spider, to use Desprez's formulation, Zipperin was creating a partial affinity as a creative mode of attunement. Attunement then names this inventive, reciprocal, and bodily dance of interspecies communication, what Erin Manning describes as a relational and transformational mode of feeling with across thresholds of difference. And this difference also lures a relational posture of polite curiosity about spiderly lives. Polite curiosity is Haraway's term describing Vinciane Desprez's approach, where curiosity is a subject-forming entanglement that requires a response that one cannot know in advance, a resting in not knowing, a being open to the surprise of what happens. This openness also underscores how a human spider encounter is not a mediation of different beings with pre-established natures and abilities. Rather, and this is another quote from Haraway, the partners do not precede the knotting. So the event of encountering one another shapes what emerges in the spider jam. And this curiosity also extends to how musicians ready themselves for the encounter. When electroacoustic pioneer Eliandra Deeg was preparing a spider jam in Saraceno's exhibition at the Palais de Tokyo, we were in long email conversations beforehand about how she might best pitch this work. She wanted to know what frequencies the spiders liked. She was enlarging the spider's capacities, responding in generous and curious ways to the speculative proposition of entering a vibrational conversation with the spider. She was preparing herself to be changed by a spiderly encounter. The spider jam also transduces acoustic or musical signals into substrate-borne vibrations, now carried through the web to the spider. In response, the spider might try to wrap the ends of a vibrating element in silk. She might shake her web. She might grow very still, refusal being another form of response, another way to recognize her agency. In the attunement of the spider jam, we aren't grasping at knowing the spider's responses or seeking to assimilate the spider's language. Rather, we are feeling into the thresholds of intensive difference, looking for potentials, for cues within them. An apprenticeship to signs, as Deleuze says of divination, extending from an alertness to the encounter and the qualitative differences it fields. Resting in this difference, the jam opens up a relational space of not knowing that Marisol de la Cadena proposes as a post-anthropocentric way of making alliances across divergences, of becoming undone, becoming transformed by the event of relation. The jam produces then its own kind of meaning, expressing a relational material semiotics in which affective and bodily cues take precedence. An embodied dance that Haraway argues communicates the nature of the relationship and is also the means of relating. So in a spider jam, our wholly different sensory schema means that vibration will be felt differently by human and spider, but there is space for something to be shared. And an idea that helps us here is the resonant sympathy that vibration can field, a way of linking disparate and different bodies, where to resonate is to be in sympathy with another body, and where sympathy is literally a co-feeling with the flows of energy immanent to an event, as it was for the Stoics who grounded their divination practices there. Writing about techno clubs, Luis Manuel Garcia describes the vibe enacted in vibrational resonance between bodies, a shared but not singular feeling, meaning felt differently, as it is for human and spider. Resonance, as Austin McQuinn reminds us, is also primary to the phenomenology of creaturely sound, amplifying possibilities for a vibrational resonant sympathy with creaturely bodies, for feeling into our own creatureliness, our own non-human becomings. The resonance of a spider jam fields potential for a pluralistic sympathy that summons, collects, shapes, and relates the human and non-human bodies, or human and non-human bodies, along vibrational axes of difference and intensity. Here, human-spider communication becomes a question of embodied extra-linguistic attunement, of curiosity about difference, of affective vibrational resonance and sympathy, of radical undoings and becomings other. In this context, this artistic fictioning or mythopoesis is not a flight from the earthy and corporeal ground of interspecies relation, but a provocation that asks, what cues, what potentials for being, sensing, relating otherwise are already here in the material and affective space of an interspecies encounter? The fiction of the spider jam writes the interspecies encounter in the form of what Richard Gruson calls a radical mediation, in which there is no discontinuity between human and non-human agency or semiosis, in which the relating of bodies conditions their very emergence. And in this co-constitutive emergence, the spider's vibratory language is not assimilated by the human, rather vibration and the resonant sympathy and sensory smudgings that it fields provide the conditions for drawing forth the non-human within the human, for a collective enunciation of people and relational possibilities to come. So speculative and mythopoetic modes of human non-human communication, like the spider vibratory jams and the spider divinatory practices that are a silent partner in this talk, unfortunately, they both push us to rethink the politics and the ethics of interspecies relationality. They experiment with widening the community of language beyond an anthropocentric frame, reaching toward modes of communication that are extralingual and intensive in order to read what was never written, to write relationality anew. But at the same time, I think they propose a texture or conceptual frame for future experimentations with a techniques of interspecies communication, one that is conditioned by the lure of difference, by the possibility of sympathetic resonance, by the need to ready oneself for the encounter and what that might mean. And as fictions, these practices stretch the imagination and change the story about human-spider relation, highlighting the creative agencements of spiders and webs themselves. I have more to say, but I think I'm going to end it here so that we can, there's a possibility for a discussion opening up, even if it's a return to Bayer's previous presentation. How do I do this? Stop share.
It's fascinating how you led us into the encounters of spiders and jamming with it and all the vibrations. We are running a bit slow on time, so there's one question from the audience which you can take for now to Ellie. Please.
I have a question about the temporality. About the temporality of the encounter. For me, it's always a question, like if you, for instance, like to communicate with the tree or with the spider. I don't know how long is the lifespan of one spider. Is it a day or is it a month?
It's definitely longer than a day, but and it also varies depending on the spider that you're talking about. But I think that's a really interesting point to think about temporality, which is obviously when you're thinking about communicating across scales, one of those scales is a temporal scale, which very much conditions the possibilities for receptivity, the possibilities for engaging with something that is, sort of maybe external to the core life story of a spider. So I think the temporalities of the jams can be as long as a jam can last, but they tend not to be particularly long. But yeah, I think in thinking through these sort of propositions for an experimentation with interspecies communication, then temporality is a really interesting thing to figure into the mix.
Thank you. Ellie, we will now move on and open up to the next speaker, to Annie Miron, also coming from Australia to us today, and she will be talking about grasslands. So from the terrestrial, we are not leaving the terrestrial, we are even scaling into the terrestrial with your talk. Annie, can you hear us well?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Can you hear you well as well? So whenever you are ready, the floor is yours. Just briefly let me introduce you to the audience. Annie is a visual artist based on the, as she wrote, unceded First Nations lands of the Aboriginal Australian people Woi Wurrung and Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation in Australia. She practices with used found materials in her art to create works that express relationships with plants and place. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. Thanks for inviting me to this conference. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners that Annette just mentioned, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and particularly the Woi Wurrung and Boon Wurrung language groups here where I live. That's where I'm presenting from you today, and that's where I work. I'd like to acknowledge their elders past and present, and all First Nations people joining us today, and acknowledge the fight that they have ongoing to look after the places that we're all just learning how to engage with, really from a Western point of view. So I'm going to be talking particularly about grasslands in Australia and my grasslands project that evolved from that. As that's just my abstract, so I'm just going to skip through because I've realised I've got a lot to get through. So here you can see Australia in the top left corner there where it belongs. Just the writing's upside down on these maps. This is the Peters projection of world maps where the relative size of countries is more correct compared to the early Renaissance projection by Mercator from Germany, where Europe was at the centre and quite large, and the Southern Hemisphere countries were all tiny. Here we see the relative size. So you can see Australia is the same size, if not bigger than the Europe and its seas, really. And relative to Latvia, our host today, Australia is about 7.7 square kilometres, whereas Latvia is about, I think, 64,000 something square kilometres, so about 0.8% the size of the landmass of Australia. This is probably the way you're used to seeing Australia, up the other way around. I'm from the bottom right corner, Victoria, not the little island, which is Tasmania, but just the bottom right corner of the big island. And this just gives a representation, it's one representation, just like the other map, of how this looks, of how much grasslands covered Australia before European invasion. So there's different, depending on who's presenting it, how this looks. Certainly in Victoria, this is zooming down into Victoria now, you can just see the bay that Melbourne is on down in the bottom right corner. About a third of Victoria was grasslands over volcanic plains. So that means over basalt columns, there's a layer of clay soil and the grasslands live on top of, thrive on top of that. And it's early, like Australia, the first convict ships arrived to the colony of Sydney in 1788. And it was only by 1800, they'd, where they were, the pastures where they were grazing the sheep, they'd already depleted those grasslands and made them extinct. And so they were importing seeds from Europe by within 12 years of colonisation. So employing lots of clovers and exotic species to be able to feed their animals. So in Victoria now, there's less than 2% of those grasslands remaining. And they're astonishing places when you do find them. They can look dry and dull and snaky, like that's why people don't like them and don't think they're much to protect. They can look like the herb field that you see just in the corner here. But this is a grassland just a few kilometres from where I live, within 10 kilometres of the Melbourne city. There's a big river runs along the right-hand side here, the Maribyrnong, which is Melbourne's second river or first river, depending. And this, I've seen kangaroos here, all sorts of things. So it's close to the city and quite extraordinary. This grassland, many of these plants will be hundreds of years old. So it's like being in an old growth forest when you enter these grasslands. You can see different patches of colour between purples and different greens. They are actually different species of grass that are clumping around to create this area. In the front right corner, you can see some exotic species, European species, that's on the edge of the grasslands. This was lived on at some point, but now is slated for development, and there's a fight on to protect this grassland. But I'm just going to rewind a little and take you through my practice. This is going to be faster than I would like, but you're going to see some amazing places. Not this one, well, this one, yes, this is my house. So this is the block of apartments where I live, where this grassland project has taken place. There's 8 apartments in there, 2 people in some, 3 people in some, 1 person in some. So it just depends who's living here at that time. So back in 2009, I did works relating to grief because I'd lost a friend. From there, I went to residencies in Paris and Rome for 5 months. It was an amazing time, but also a time where I really could not deny that colonial projects, particularly in Rome, where I was staying at the British School at Rome. So there was the British colony. The Roman Empire is very evident, and also the Catholic Empire is very evident. So I was quite overwhelmed with colonial forces. So I came back to Australia and was part of this sculpture exhibition down on the Surf Coast, just a couple of hours away from here. And I wove and used found ropes to create, and one end I attached the Union Jack because it's still part of our flag and our political system here. And on the other end, I tied them in nooses around the rocks and the trees on the shoreline. So this is me starting to engage with Australia as looking for the marks that we make on it as a place, but also that it in turn is made on me and is making on me and making on my art practice. This is the first residency. So I vowed to undertake a series of bush residency ones about every 2 years to get to know where I'm from. And this residency is just on the outskirts of Melbourne, of the suburbia. It's on the Yarra River, so our other river. It's actually the traditional name is Birrarung, which is River of Mists, and you can really see the mists here. And what I learned from this place is that the forest is complicated, and there's so many species of things overlapping and pushing each other and taking over or falling down. This area, there was a lot of interaction between exotic species and the eucalypts, like the original fauna of the place. And just up river or down river a little bit, here was all native species. I had a friend who's a bird person come along. Here was all indigenous species of birds, and a little bit further on where we got closer into the suburb, there was lots of exotic species of birds as well. So as plants changed, so did the others that inhabit it. From there came this sculpture woven forms, like a forest of forms, all different because that's what I experienced in the bush there. Oops, just go back. And I invited different collaborators to join me with this. A friend, a filmmaker, Anna Brownfield, made a film that inhabited the work in its quiet times. And another friend, Finnish choreographer Favela Vira Ortiz and dancer Sana From, came and activated the work with a dance performance called Myoclonic. Next was a residency in the Australian Capital Territory, so about 900 kilometres, 800 kilometres north of here. This project was, and this is where we're connecting Beatrice, this was exploring the environmental protection of the alpine bogs and fens, so very watery places. And this is the hut I stayed in, not much facilities, but I was there for a month and spending my time out walking and drawing. So walking and drawing have become fundamental to my practice as a way to get to know a place, because when I sit to draw, all the others around come back to life. So when we're just walking through, you see some things, but when I sit to draw, lots of things start to come around. When I refer to others too, I'm referring to weather, rocks, the underground that's under me, the plants, all the animals, all the insects, they're all my others. I don't have a hierarchy for that. And this is the work that came out of that. A lot of woven cardboard and colours of different species from there. Alongside of all of this, I'm working on the block of flats where I live, just introducing different plants. But what I also learned was working with people that they're other people who live here, that if I planted something they didn't like, they'd poison it or they'd pull it out. So I had to learn really quickly about, or not really quickly, it took time, about how to grow things. The other thing I would do, like you can see along the front here, is plant a lot of the one species. And what I found of those indigenous plants is often they would all die. They're actually like friends to survive. And this is back to that experience at the the Australian Capital Territory residency. This is me learning about plants and their friends and how they live together, and all that critters and things that live there as well. So this is looking at my feet, and I'm just going to take you through a quick pan up from the floor level up through about a metre. From there, I rewove those works that I started off with and invited another dancer to collaborate and inhabit the works. This is Juji Soboslay from Canberra. And this weave that I used is like a finger trap. So you push one way and it opens up and lets you in. If you pull the other way, it tightens around you and does like a spidery wrap. At one point, Juji got into a panic and started kicking holes in it to get out. So that was interesting. I won't talk too much about this work, but urban Melbourne, Docklands, the only thing I could find to draw here that was a plant form was the old pier post, which you can just see with the white caps down in about the middle of the right-hand side of the screen. So I researched and found out the trees that were harvested to make the docks and wove this work for people to inhabit, and the underside is painted with the leaves and flower colours of those 5 species, because those trees would have only been cared for by traditional owners before they were cut down as well. Next residency, Bundanon in New South Wales. This is around 2016. And here there was, I became enamoured of all the climbing plants reaching and floating their tendrils out, trying to catch hold of something to grab and create their form. And what they used to surround was a species of tree called Tuna ciliata, or red cedar, which was harvested to almost extinction here. You don't really see it much at all in the landscape anymore. It's very hard to find. It was a beautiful tree to make furniture and things out of, compared to hard eucalypts that were blunting everybody's saws and very difficult to cut and would warp. So they harvested it too much. This was the work that came out of that, which was a collaboration with one of the fellow residents again, Candy Royale, who was a wordsmith. And so the gap in the middle at the bottom is where that tree would have been, because they used to be entwined with these climbers, and people were invited to contribute their own thoughts, drawings along the way. Here I am in 2018, and I'm in Tasmania northwest in the Alpine, so going back to the Alpine bogs and fens, but in another part of Australia. The residency is a small hut provided by the National Park Service, and I was with the University of Tasmania as supporting the residency. It's another rainforest, but one that often has snow. It's only at about 800 metres where the hut is, slightly subalpine, but it's very close to walk up to the alpine area, which is here. As you can see, this is an alpine bog again, looks a bit like the grasslands, looks very uninteresting when you look from a distance, kind of bland and boring, but up close and personal, which is what I do through the drawing practice. There's a lot to discover. And I started to, so always part of my practice has been meeting with traditional owners where possible, and scientists and rangers and historians, anyone who's got an interest in that place, and exploring it through their eyes as well. This time what I've done is open that to the public, that experience, and so people came along. You can see holding the core sampler is Reese Wilson, the Parks Ranger, and in the blue jacket on the left is biologist Jenny Wynnum, who's a specialist in sphagnum moss, and one of the scientists on the right is Alastair Richardson, Professor Alastair Richardson, who's a specialist in crayfish that burrow down into the bogs. Here's a core sample of peat we were able to take out and put back. And it explains all the years of history that are recorded, thousands of years in that one sample. And this is just a quick shot in the snow of other footprints, so that showing that we're always sharing the place with others. And so that was one of the big things I learned from Tasmania, was these places are so alive in lots of dimensions. And also the other thing is, and I think I got this from Robin Wall Crimerer, that you can't look at beauty and not see the damage. And the more the time I've spent in these places, the more I become aware of the damage. And this has become, in some ways, another grief project. So here we are back at the grassland, back at the block. This block, you can start to see I've taken over the front garden. People are getting a bit more confident with me to do a bit more changing. There's the grass. The lawn is flat and boring, and couch and oxalis mostly. So I covered it in cardboard for 2 years nearly, until all the residents started to complain that it was too ugly. But I was trying to kill off those plants underneath. And luckily at the time, that some of the residents that lived here were a French sociologist who's really into the environment, Florence, and her partner Tord, who was a soil scientist. So he's from Sweden. So they both got involved and helped me replant. You can also see some lettuce growing there, because I'm always looking to grow food. So there's the garden replanted, and a year later, it's starting to take shape. And a little bit later. And it's also seasonal. So the changes I'm seeing is that this is a summer shot from 2021, I think. And the grasses die off so become all golden colours. So it's an amazing transformation through the year, through the seasons, as part of the work. Lots of different saltbush. You can see in the front there is still a, what do you call it? Oh, I'm going to forget. I've started propagating my own plants as well as things have gone. And these next images I took this morning. So these ones, I'm just going to take you through quietly to see what is there now. A lot of them have so many species in every shot. I'm not going to have time to explain them all. So let's just take a quiet journey. This image is coming towards the end and is on the edge of the grassland. And what it shows is some weed species on the edge, which I'll be weeding out as soon as I can, but also that there's a seed bank developing and new things are self-germinating within this grassland. And I've known of sometimes before. I remember I did a project with the St Kilda Botanic Gardens in the Indigenous plant section years ago. and the gardener there pointed out that there was a plant that they hadn't seen for 70 or 80 years, and that it had come up when all the other indigenous plants had been planted around it, they regrew. And now I'm faced with some things dying, and in this case, the Acacia paradoxa on the left of the screen, and how to integrate that death into the grassland so that it continues life. And that's it from me.
Well, thank you, Annie. It really was a very touching walk you took us on, from the abstract Peter's projection map to the green grassland and also the living and the dying processes. We have time for 2 questions or thoughts, connections. Eva, please.
Yeah, I was wondering, where did you get the seeds from? Did you dig the plants out, or did you get the seeds from the grassland to plant your garden?
So some of the seeds, Florence, who you saw in the image planting the grasses, she was friends with a grasslands biologist who has rights to gather some seeds. So they gave us a little packet of mixed seeds, but we also bought some as seedlings from an Indigenous nursery to cover the whole area, because how things germinate is something we're all still learning.
And are your neighbors are more connected now to the green, I guess?
Yeah. So a lot of people who live here now, when they arrive, they, you ask them to just start talking to them, because I'm out in the garden, so people talk to me, and people have taken the flat because they see species of birds here that they don't see somewhere else, or they just really love the garden and that it's such a dynamic, active garden. The other thing is with this garden, it's actually a food and medicine garden inherently in those Indigenous plants. So there's more, and it's just us learning what we can eat and how, and what can be used for different medicine as well. So it's actually becoming a food forest of sorts too.
Well, that's a nice comment to wrap up this one. A garden of foods or for thinking. We would now change over to Toyin Karelse, who will be talking about monster code, and he will also be taking us on a walk and on the land. So thank you, Annie, once again, and stay with us.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'll share my screen.
Hi, Toyin.
Hello.
So while you are setting up your screen, let me shortly introduce you. You are coming to us today from the Netherlands. You're based in the Netherlands, and you are a member of FOAM. What is FO standing for? I was wondering. AM is Amsterdam, right?
AM is Armenia.
Uh-huh.
It's basically just the word foam. The idea is that the organization is like foam. It's light, adaptable, consisting of many bubbles.
And in this organization of many foams, you are one of the practitioners who come together from different fields. They work transdisciplinary in laboratories, and you are also operating your laboratories in gardens and outside, right?
Yeah.
And today you are talking to us about your project, the Monster Code. We are looking forward to getting to know your project.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. It's been a wonderful session, and it's great to be back for another Renewables Future with RIXC. I much appreciate all the efforts that are put into continuing this series of conferences. Today I'll talk about Monster Code, which is a research line I've been on for maybe a year and a half. It's kind of like experimental archaeology, and it's sort of aimed at animism. I'm just saying some of the words in the slide. So monster code, monster refers to imagination, and code refers to encoding information directly into landscape. It starts from the question how people were consolidating their knowledge before there was reading and writing. You know, how did we do that? As Beatrice said in her presentation, how did we keep our minds connected without the written word? There are many ways, of course, and I'll just show a few different ones. These are kachina, which are small dolls that represent deities for the Pueblo cultures. And these deities are associated with particular topics of knowledge in that culture. So in a way, they are like a library. And the library is sort of character driven. Characters are the central nodes. A very different example is the Inca Kipu, which is more like a database, I guess, made out of these knotted ropes, where the sort of suspending rope is the main structuring element, and then each rope itself, by having little knots, can contain information. These are carved stone balls from Europe, which were handheld, and the thinking is that through holding it and sort of rotating it, different parts of these stones could hold knowledge. They could sort of be, yeah, hooks onto which knowledge could be hooked. Similar but more complicated are the Lukasa of the Luba cultures, which are like your handheld phone. So these are objects that would be held, and they're for touching. So you see all these small objects on the surface. Knowledge would be sort of, information would be associated with those different little beads and surfaces and textures. So you travel through that knowledge or information by touch, and it could hold vast amounts of information. One bead might, for instance, hold the narrative for the narrative knowledge that you need to remember all birds or medicine, or so each little node itself is a rich structure. Somewhat related, maybe from China, are these pinyin stones, where that you would travel around in your mind. They sort of represent miniature landscapes. So instead of hiking a mountain, you would sort of hike the mountain on your desk or in your garden. So it's a way of traveling through landscape that's not really associated with knowledge, but I'm using it here as a bridge to my main topic, which is Monster Code is specifically interested in examples and practices where knowledge was stored directly into landscape. And there are some, examples from around the world: Aboriginal songlines, Native American pilgrimage trails, Inca secas, the ceremonial roads of the Pacific Islanders, or the Neolithic causeways of Europe. And I'll skip the little quote below. So looking at those kinds of practices, I've started to try them out. I tried them out in my neighborhood. And there are different ways of, as you practice, you start to get a sense of how it works. And there are different ways of, you know, depending on what you want to, what the information is, there are different ways of arranging it. And the simplest form is just areas. You just associate an area with something that's relevant to that area. There are also circles. You could work with this sort of method of loci, which is just sets of 5. And 5 just happens to work well. I guess it's sort of survived in Europe through Roman tradition, and then some medieval scholars wrote about it and used it to remember. The method loci is really specifically for remembering things. Then there are, if you sort of more linear models would be lines that can fork. So that might be useful for if, for instance, you want to encode species of animal. I've tried it with not dragonflies, but damselflies. So all indigenous damselflies of the Netherlands, I've sort of made a narrative. It's like a short story that lists all of them, and I've associated parts of the story with different branches of a tree. So that's the forking model. There's a line where you just walk through space, and when you pass by things, knowledge might be associated with those places. A line is also something that can connect all of these models. And in the center you see character, which is like those little dolls I showed of the Pueblo people. Character, we all know as a memory device or something that can hold information, because human minds are really good at remembering characters. We, you know, from movie stars, all kinds of stuff, literary figures. So what I started with in my neighborhood is I thought I need some material to practice. And I wanted to try and make a bigger space, something that can contain more stuff. So I started with a subject I don't really care much about because it was just practice. I used the list of American presidents. And I started on one side of the shopping street, and I decided that the first president is just before 1800. So I thought if the corner of the shopping street is 1800, around the corner is the first president. And that first president is Washington, of course, and around the corner is Frankie's Beauty Salon. That's the kind of place where you can get shampoo and hair extensions and stuff like that. So I just imagine Washington sitting there washing his hair, you know, it's easy. The second president is Adams, and that's on the corner. So he's just after 1800. And Adams, on the corner is a cafe, a little bar, and the bar is being refurbished, I think is the word. It's being rebuilt. So I thought Adams, maybe Adams, a dam of beer has burst through and destroyed this little establishment, and now it needs to be rebuilt. So the third one is Jefferson, and he's in a snack bar, because I thought Jefferson sounds a little bit like Chef Jefferson. So it's a 3-star chef working in a little snack bar. So through simple associations, which are really trivial but easy and fun, you build up a line all along the street of all these presidents. And when I started practicing, at first I could do maybe 4 or 5. The second time I did maybe 15. And the third time I could do all 47. So through practice, you get quite good at it. Now, this is a trivial thing in a way, but what it offers you is a timeline for 2 centuries of world history. So once you have that set, anything you're interested in to fill in that space that you want to organize, you can add. So that was just playing around really. On the other side of the shopping street, where those big numbers are, I really got to work, because it's sort of 6 blocks in the shopping street that have the same, they're equally dispersed. So I thought 6 blocks can be 6 million years of human evolution. So that's what I started to build next. And it really just, the first human ancestor is Aurorenturgenensis. So that's about 6 million years ago. They're on the corner of the shopping street. They're sort of, there's a lot of debate. Are they in the human line? Are they in the chimpanzee line? But generally, people are saying, okay, this is the start of the human story. So about a block before is where there's a, what's that called? Where a toy shop. And that's sort of where we split from chimpanzees. So that's easy to remember. I just see the chimpanzees in the gift shop. Aurorenturgenensis is on the corner in a nut and fruit bar, which is easy to remember because that's what they eat. So in a similar way as the presidents, I just, arrange them in a timeline. And the striking thing is that when you walk through it, you have a physical sensation of, you have a spatial awareness of duration. You think with Australopithecus, they're around, that's another human ancestor, they're around for a long time. You're just walking and walking, you think, wow, they're still here, they're still here, they're still here. And then when you come to Homo sapiens, us, that's just the last shop. The last shop is a nail bar, where you get sort of, and that is shocking because when you look back, you can hardly see the end of the shopping street. So in this way, it becomes more interesting to work with, memory spaces you can walk through. So scale is interesting. What's also interesting is that you see relations. When you get interested in these early humans because, they're in your shopping street. So I start to search them more and more. And you have this sort of classic drawing of Australopithecus, the man and the woman, sort of walking through the savannah, and behind them is an elephant. But the elephant in the drawing has teeth that go this way. So I'm thinking, what? I thought that elephant evolution was like way before human evolution, but it wasn't. So I started to encode elephants in my same timeline. There's 167 elephant species, so that's way too much. So I decided to just do European elephants. So here you see a little, there's no list of European elephants, so you have to make it yourself. And there's gaps in information. So for some, the years when they were around were unclear. For some, there's no name, you know, there's gaps. But still, it's fun to sort of encode them. And then you see, okay, at the moment when one human ancestor arrives, 4 elephant species in Europe go extinct. So you start to see, you know, it becomes interesting. So we try to do this with small groups of people. In this case, a couple is trying to encode 5 elephant species in this garden. So they've sort of looked at, in their case, they've looked just at the shape of the islands that these small elephants were from, and looked for patches of plants in the borders that were similar. It's quite fun to do. People come up with all kinds of strategies. Here, people are trying to encode famous female pirates. It's a list that's sort of to counter the presidents, you know, female pirates. And this lady is encoding a recipe for a kind of cake. So a recipe is an interesting data set, to call it that, because it has ingredients, amounts, and preparation. So there's sort of 3 layers of stuff you try to encode. And she did it with small sticks and, you know, just in this small hole in the ground. This is a recipe for a kind of Slovenian soup that 3 people encoded in this backyard. So it starts with pepper and salt. Pepper is sort of this grit, and salt is the sand on the floor. You need to have 2 leaves of laurel, which they sort of associated with those plastic things that cover the windows. There's sauerkraut, 1 barrel, 1 pound, and there was a barrel lying there, so it's a barrel of sauerkraut, etc., etc. And what I'm now looking at is to see, you know, there are some sort of suggestions that these encoding or these sort of knowledge systems in Europe went through a big transition when we started to become settled, when agriculture arrived. Exactly at that time, these kinds of wood henges and stone henges appear in the landscape. And some people say, okay, you know, the worst thing you can have is a Stonehenge theory, but or maybe a UFO theory, but still, you know, they make the argument that from sort of associating knowledge as a nomadic people through landscape, the settling communities try to make circular journeys in which to encode everything that's needed for your culture. So your medicines, your plant knowledge, your bird knowledge, your, you know, anything about animals, political relations, all those kinds of things. And so that will be the next stage, I guess, to try out a wood henge in Europe for the first time in 3,000 years. That's my presentation. Thank you.
What about your thoughts? You would like to connect to the monster code. Have you experienced things like this yourself, maybe once, or?
Maybe I missed it. Where does the monster come from?
Yeah, true. The monster is, so when you are working in your city, as I did, there's lots of, you know, a shopping street has so much for your imagination to hook onto. So it can be a word, it can be a color, it can even be a smell. These shops are really rich. That shopping street ends, and it ends in quite a boring square. In that square, that's the 1700s, 1600s, 1500s. That's where I started to encode early naturalists of Holland. And the first one, Baster, Job Baster, was in a building that's so boring that I really struggled. Until, you know, one of the things about Job Baster is that he brought the first goldfish to Europe. So I thought, okay, I'll just place a humongous goldfish above this boring building. Since then, you know, it's been easy. So that's where the monsters come in. That's where character comes in these sort of knowledge systems, if you can call them that. Because character, through character, there's story, you know. So monsters stand for that aspect.
Thank you. There's a question from Ali.
Yep, sorry, it's a question, I think it relates a little bit to, like, you gave these really beautiful examples at the start of these prototypical devices that sort of informed this journey. But I was also wondering about the relationship to, because you had this slide where you kind of abstracted some really beautiful patterns and different, you know, different patterns or codes that you had divined from these different objects. But I'm also wondering about the materiality of them, and also this kind of like tactile engagement with that material that was as I understand it, this process of remembering or reading the objects that became a kind of like encounter that was very much material. I mean, you kind of returned to material in the end when you gave us these really beautiful examples of different encodings in that park space. But I thought I lost track of it a little bit in the mapping to these shop fronts. But I guess you kind of were answering that just then in the previous question. But yeah, I guess it's a question about this materiality and tactile or other engagement with material.
There is, yeah, an interesting aspect about materiality was came up with a student who was working in a different square, and she was doing sort of all the countries of Africa and their capitals, and she distributed them. So the most southern country was in the most southern corner of the square, and she practiced this maybe 2 months, and over 2 months already, you know, she had associated one capital with a particular tile in the floor, and then those tiles were removed. So you have to sort of adapt your story to the material reality, but it also starts to become a way to keep track of the changes of your material surroundings. She only remembers that specific tile because she's probably the only one in the square who remembers it, because she has sort of used it in her system, or yeah, she's become related to it.
Jens?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Toyn, and it's really exciting to learn about these historical transpositions. I was wondering whether there's something in digital culture and also in architecture where you could also find, maybe especially in colonial architecture in the Netherlands, links to precise patterns that maybe colonialists have been taking from these cultures, right? Also thinking about in how far today a lot of artists in the digital realm go back to knitting, weaving, coding, Kipu. I mean, I know at least 10 artists who go back to Kipu technique because it's amazing. Also, there's this Nordic way of, for example, paralleling weaving, knitting, and coding. As you can see, for example, recently in the Riga Triennale in Trondheim, well, the weaving and the coding paradigm have been parallelized. Or you have this also in the Swedish artist Johansson's work, that coding, knitting, and weaving are put together. So just wondering how far this kind of ritual coding would resonate with having an embeddedness also in the concrete architecture, which is in the Netherlands mostly colonial.
Yeah, in foam there are different sort of studios, and the studios in Brussels and Cornwall have worked extensively on coding and weaving, on live coding also, and so it's very interesting to talk to people who do coding for in the digital realm, because they're really good at figuring out strategies. So the patterning that they do is in a way, you know, they really quickly pick up on the patterning of patterning strategies for different kinds of sort of data sets. I think the colonial aspect, I think that's what you said. It was hard, that word was hard to hear, but I think you said colonial. It's true that, yeah, it's true that the Dutch landscape is just, you know, and, you know, in Europe in general, the pressures of modernism are so huge that it's interesting, you know. It's one question about is that I'm sort of thinking about is, if you would do this kind of wood henge and start to experiment with it, is that in a way cultural appropriation across time and not so much across continents or different cultures? But, you know, if you go that far back, are we still related to that? So yeah, those are questions that I'm exploring.
And have you ever connected it as well to the Latin rhetorics, the memorization techniques, where you always had houses and different urban settlements to keep everything in mind?
Yeah, one of the models I showed was sort of a star, a 5-pointed star. That's basically the structure for these memory palaces and method of the loci that comes from that tradition. And it's sort of an elaboration of the circle, where, you know, the circle has a specific 5-sided symmetry. So each point can have another. So if your house is 5 rooms, there are 5 objects in each room, and each object, you know, an object can be a closet like this, and it can have 5 objects in that again. So it expands very quickly, and 5 is just something that works really well, because you tend to remember at least 3, maybe 4, and then you know where the holes are. So your mind is quite good at sort of filling in the gaps. So yeah, that's, all of that is interesting. But I would say that the benefit of working in space, to work spatially, is that it's not just about remembering things. It is also about seeing relations between things. Your thinking becomes relational. You know, if in my bookshelf, all subjects are sort of separated into different volumes. When you have a unified space that you walk through for all your knowledge, I mean, it has given my mind so much structure. It was quite surprising.
It's an amazing project. Do you feel differences in your thinking if you picture something in an urban landscape or in nature?
Yeah.
You are together with a bunch of different people. I think it's really interesting when you tell stories about putting certain objects in a different order together.
So there's different levels of transience
Mm-hmm.
that you start to notice between sort of biological spaces or man-made spaces. So I guess, yeah. And there was another thing I was thinking about. Yeah, I guess these human-made spaces are so full of triggers, especially when it's a shopping street. You know, it is a bit different than working in an area that a field of grasses. You know, you need more concentration. Your perception needs to work a little bit harder when an environment has less of these human sort of billboards and things.
And thank you so much for all these examples and for giving us a new opportunity to get out and imagine and what's important and all together. So nice.
Thanks for all the other talks. It was really great.
Yeah, the time went fast. Thank you to everyone. And now there will be a lunch break, and the last sessions for today about new ecosophies and ecofeminism and socio-ecological justices will resume at 4 p.m. Thank you all.